So let's talk about the VAT flat rate scheme and how this can actually be different for business owners that are looking to register their business for VAT, and whether or not this is actually the right approach for you to take if you're a business owner that has now officially reached the threshold to register for VAT. Now, the first thing to understand is that VAT, also known as value-added tax, is a type of tax that is paid by business owners that have typically reached an annual turnover of at least £90,000, and they are now eligible to register for VAT. Now, VAT is typically paid at approximately 20%. Now, this is a type of tax that is paid by business owners here in the UK. Now, let's dive specifically into the VAT flat rate scheme, which is a great alternative for business owners that basically find the complexities of handling their VAT extremely difficult. Now, the VAT flat rate scheme actually provides a great alternative for you to be able to handle the administrative aspects of your VAT without really having to do so much, so to speak. If you are using the VAT flat rate scheme, technically, this basically means that you don't have to worry so much about taking into consideration the VAT that you are charging to your customers and trying to work out the difference between this and the VAT that you're making on your business purchases, because typically that is how the VAT reconciliation is done and calculated to HMRC. Now, if you're using the VAT flat rate scheme approach, this basically means that you are able to simply apply what we call a fixed percentage onto your turnover. Okay, so rather than having this really complex, tedious approach where you have to look at the difference in VAT that you are charging versus VAT that you are claiming back, you can simply say, okay, this is the industry within which my business operates, and this is the fixed rate percentage that HMRC has said is applicable to my business, and you can simply apply that percentage to your turnover. The main difference between the VAT flat rate schemes and other VAT schemes is that you will typically tend to pay your VAT at a lower rate than the standard 20% that you typically will tend to pay VAT on. Now, the percentage at which you're actually going to pay your VAT is really going to heavily depend on what type of business purchases that you make, what types of goods and services it is that your business tends to provide. So it is important to bear this in mind if you are indeed thinking of taking this approach to help you simplify how your business is able to pay its VAT. So if you're thinking of joining the VAT flat rate scheme, you need to be thinking about whether or not you're actually eligible to join the VAT flat rate scheme as a UK business. Now, the first thing in terms of eligibility to consider is, as a UK business, you will need to be VAT registered for you to actually be eligible to join the VAT flat rate scheme. Now, the second thing to consider when it comes to eligibility for the VAT flat rate scheme is that you will need to ensure that your taxable turnover does not exceed or has not exceeded £150,000 in the last 12 months, and that excludes VAT. So it's very important to have these two things in your criteria and in your checks when it comes to actually thinking about signing up for the VAT flat rate scheme. You're wondering whether the VAT flat rate scheme is actually worth it or it's right for your business. It is worth bearing in mind that this particular scheme is not for every business, because every business, every company is different and unique in its own set of business goals and business objectives. So the VAT flat rate scheme may or may not be applicable for your particular business. It's also going to heavily depend on what type of industry it is you operate in, what sort of goods and or services it is that you provide to your customers. Taking some of these things into consideration will heavily affect whether or not the VAT flat rate scheme is going to be the right choice for your business. Now, one thing I will say when you're thinking about the benefits and drawbacks of the VAT flat flat rate scheme is that if you're a small business and you have a relatively simpler trading structure, then the VAT flat rate scheme may indeed very well suit your type of business, okay? Because you might actually end up benefiting from having, much lower VAT to pay depending on what your profit looks like. You'll also have, much better bookkeeping and improved record keeping. And this is really for businesses that have a simple, business structures, not complex at all, not complicated. And this is more likely to be heavily beneficial to those type of businesses. Now, on the contrary, if you have a much larger and or complex business structure, then using the VAT flat rate scheme might actually make things a lot more complicated for your business, because the nature of the VAT flat rate scheme is actually more designed and more tailored to benefiting business owners that are much simpler in terms of the nature of their operations and in terms of their trading style as well. Now, in addition to this, it's important to understand that if you're a business that has a significantly larger volume of transactions within your business, then the VAT flat rate scheme might not be applicable to you, just because you might end up in a scenario where you actually end up having to pay a much higher amount of VAT than you ordinarily would need to. So it's important to consider this when you are looking or thinking about joining the VAT flat rate scheme. Like, is it going to be worthwhile for your business? Is it right for your business? What do the level of transactions within your business looks like? And, how does that compare with, the pros and cons of actually registering for VAT under this particular scheme? Now, if you are thinking of leaving the VAT flat rate scheme, you can actually leave the scheme at any point simply by writing to HMRC and informing them of your intention to leave the scheme. Now, what will happen once you do this is that HMRC should then inform you of when your official leaving date is from the scheme, and you should also ensure that any outstanding VAT liabilities are settled before you leave the scheme. It's also important to ensure that you understand what your responsibilities are going to be once you've actually left the scheme, and what particular VAT scheme you will then be moving on to, and how you'll be handling your VAT obligations once you've left the scheme. Now, if you are dealing with a particularly tricky VAT return, or indeed you're unsure of what your particular VAT scheme will be for your particular business, then do give us a call or check the link in the description box below for ways on how you can contact us and how we can help support you with your VAT obligations. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you haven't already done so, please do give this video a like. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell.